Hello, guys. Welcome to another exciting episode of the show, Control or Be Controlled, a podcast designed to help you start thinking differently and take control of your life. And I remain your host, Darlington. Today's guest is Steve Anderson, a strategic risks and business growth expert, best-selling author, and one of the world's leading voices on how businesses can innovate, adapt, and grow. Drawing on decades of experience in the insurance industry, Steve studied one of the greatest success stories of our time, Amazon. His research became the foundation for his best-selling book, The Bezos Letter, 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon, which became a Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and international bestseller. Steve, welcome to the show.
Darlington, thank you so much for having me.
All right, Steve, thank you so much for coming. So, you have studied Jeff Bezos and Amazon extensively. Tell us what makes Bezos a master of risks. And what can entrepreneurs today learn from the way he approaches uncertainty?
Well, I think the first thing that stood out to me when I was reading the shareholder letters is how much Bezos talked about the need to experiment. And what I mean by that is he said multiple times throughout the years, actually, that we being Amazon, need to invent on behalf of the customer. And inventing requires experimentation. An experiment is, how do I want to say this? Let me restate that. When you do an experiment, if you know the results, it's not an experiment, it's confirmation. But true experiments have often surprising results, and some of those are failures. And those failures become data on what works and what doesn't work. And so this whole idea of risk taking is really, I think, one of the keys to his thinking and Amazon's growth. So experimentation leads to invention, which allows innovation. And I do think now there's too much emphasis on innovation and not nearly enough emphasis on invention. And companies are reluctant to talk about invention because of the failure piece. But that's something that Bezos really understood. And one of the phrases he uses when he talks about other companies is unwarranted risk aversion. And so taking risk is integral to business growth. And that's why I call him the master of risk, because he uses risk strategically in the business to grow.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. So, moving on, many business leaders either avoid risks or take unnecessary risks. How can someone know whether they are taking too much risks or not enough?
Well, I think you're right. What I've seen is too many companies, if not most companies, think risk is bad. And I have spent my career in the insurance industry, and insurance is all about transferring the risk or mitigating the risk. Um, and that becomes the problem. So as a business grows, whether a startup just getting going or a business that is growing, if they're not also looking at what they need to invent next for their customers, then they're focusing too much on innovation and not enough on um, the invention piece of it. And that's scary because they have a product, they have a service, they have a customers and an audience willing to pay for it, Now I'm asking them to take more risk in determining what's going to be next. And I think we all understand that technology, customers change really rapidly and more rapidly today than ever. And if they're not looking to the future, if they're just relying on what got them there, that's takes them down a path that, in Bezos' words, is a day two company. And we can talk more about that if you'd like. But this idea of not being willing to take risks. And I always want to say that this is not stupid risk. This is not who cares. This is strategic. It is thoughtful. It is planned experiments. And at the same time, understanding that not every experiment is going to work correctly. So Amazon built, and Bezos built it in Amazon, this idea of, okay, what are some of the tools we can use to actually reduce the risks of experimentation? And one of those tools is what was called the 6-page memo, and more recently called the working backward document. So in 2004, early in Amazon's history, Bezos sent an email around to senior leadership team and said, we will no longer allow PowerPoint or slide-oriented presentations in our meetings. Well, that's sort of crazy. That's what everybody did. But what Bezos said was people hide behind PowerPoint bullet points. They haven't fully thought through the problem, the question, the new product that they're being asked by the people attending the meeting to approve. What he said in place of it is that person calling the meeting needs to write a written narrative, a written memo, and a maximum of 6 pages. So what that does is it forces people to think more deeply about what they're proposing, about the experiment, about what we know and what skills we have, what we don't know and what skills we need to develop, and what is the benefit to the customer. And when you have to write it down, you are forced to think deeper. And then that memo, that document, is not sent out before the meeting. It's literally handed out in printed form at the meeting. And people sit like a study hall for the first part of the meeting. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 30 minutes. And everybody reads together that memo. And what happens is everybody literally is on the same page. And there are numerous examples of employees at Amazon that have said that process forces us to make sure we fully understand what we are asking and the approvals that we want. And it's the idea of slowing down to speed up. Too often companies make a decision and get 3 months, 6 months, maybe longer down the road and realize they didn't understand. So it's slowing down, taking the time to fully understand as much as possible, and then the idea is that will mitigate the failures. Doesn't eliminate them, but it will help think differently about the experiment. And then if something doesn't work, if it fails, they have a document now they can go back to and say, okay, what didn't we understand that we should have? How can we improve in our next decision-making process? So it's almost a self-correcting process by having that document to go back to. So that's just an example of strategic risk-taking and thinking through that literally most companies don't do. So again, I want to emphasize this is not stupid risk. This is strategic risk taking. And that's how you mitigate the downside of the risks that you take and the experiments that you do.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. So, what are Amazon's customers' experience pillars, and how can smaller businesses apply those principles without Amazon's resources?
Well, in the very first shareholder letter, which was published in 1997, Bezos talked about kind of three main areas, and one of those areas was customers. And he said that in that letter that we will obsess over customers. It's a unique word, a different way of looking at it. And I would say every business knows they need to take care of customers. And so the focus Amazon has is obsessing over customers. And I think that's one of the things that sets them apart. Most businesses talk about customer service, customer journey, customer experience, but obsessing over customers takes it to a different level. And frankly, the word obsession can have some negative connotations. But I would argue that a business can't be too obsessed with customers. And it's not that customers are always right, but that we focus on the customer and making sure their experience at Amazon is the best that it possibly can be. One other thing I'll say is that Bezos identified three customer pillars. The first one is wide selection. So customers, in fact, he said in a later letter, we can't imagine a day that customers would want less selection, higher prices, and slower delivery. So those are three customer pillars: wide selection, low prices, and fast delivery. And when you look at Amazon and what they've built over the years, it really is all focused on those three customer pillars that go back to this mindset of obsessing over the customer.
Okay, so moving on, many entrepreneurs fear failure. How can leaders change their relationship with failure and use it as a learning tool?
Okay, I missed a part of that. How can
How
ask the
can
question again? Ask
leaders,
the question again for me.
many entrepreneurs fear failure. How can leaders change their relationship with failure and use it as a learning tool?
Um, well, I think I have two thoughts there. One is um, someone starting a new business, an entrepreneur, is taking a risk by the very fact that they have an idea that they want to implement. I think part of what happens is as they start growing, they get more customers, they maybe add more employees. Um, there is this natural tendency to start protecting, what they have, the idea they have, and that gets translated into employees. So oftentimes, some of the best ideas for how to improve the customer experience, how to reduce friction in the transactions, come from existing employees and their interaction with customers. And too often, an entrepreneur doesn't support trying an experiment and failing. And that's one of my principles is what I call encourage successful failure. And it really is a mindset and a culture that should be built in any company, meaning in order to improve, you've got to experiment. Experiments often fail, and that failure is information and data, and it's how you learn what works and what doesn't work. And so I think that mindset gets into the culture. And again, I don't care what size business somebody has. It could be themselves, a solopreneur, or it could be, 25 employees and continuing to look at how to grow. That mindset And I mentioned earlier, day two thinking. The last principle in my 14 is believe it's always day one. And in Bezos' terms, he, in his very first letter, again, 1997, he said it's day one for the internet and for Amazon.com if we execute well. Well, that day one mindset is continuing to think like a startup. In fact, he said he wants Amazon always to be the world's largest startup because of that excitement that you have when you're first starting a business. And too often, either leadership doesn't continue to think that way, or they don't incorporate that into how they interact with their employees and how employees then interact with their customer. And the idea of day one, the corollary or the other side of that coin is a day two company. And what Bezos said about day two, he was actually asked at an all hands meeting, a couple thousand employees, Jeff, what does day two look like? And he said, day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And he went on to say, it could take 20 years or more for that process to happen. But once you start down that day two mindset of protecting, not experimenting, not inventing, only innovating, then you ultimately will be gone as a company. And certainly there are some big names and many, many, many small companies that have gone down that path, once extremely successful and literally no longer here, out of business. So that leadership for the entrepreneur, for the owner, helping everyone in the organization keep that mindset of it's still day one. We still have so much to invent on behalf of the customer. I hope that answered your question. I hope it did.
Yeah, sure. That answers my question. So, what can entrepreneurs learn from Amazon's culture of experimentation and constant improvement?
Well, again, I think I will go back and point to this idea of encouraging successful failure. Do you punish people for failing, or do you encourage them to learn from the failure and go on to what's next? And again, this always is a really interesting balancing act between success and failure, experimentation and coming up with something new. I also want to say Amazon has an intolerance for incompetence. So if an employee is just incompetent, they're continuing to make mistakes, they should be getting better. They should be having more successes than failures. If that's not the case, then that employee may not fit in that company. And again, I think that for leadership, that's something to keep in mind. This is not, it doesn't matter. It does matter, and it matters a lot in terms of how employees are expected to operate. And one of the things Bezos said is that leaders are right a lot. And so if somebody in the organization is not right a lot, that may mean this is not the best place for them. And it's up to the owner, the person, founder, whatever that particular title is, to keep that balance and understand continual failure is not acceptable. And so, again, that's the risk taking that goes on. And one of the ways to mitigate that is, again, one of my principles is that you maintain or focus on high standards. When you hire people, you make sure you hire the very best you can for the job. and you don't fill a position just to fill it. You fill a position with the right person that will fit into the culture of the organization, and will make good decisions on behalf of the company.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. So, my final question for you is this. For a business owner who feels stuck and wants to grow, what is the first principle they should focus on?
Well, there are 14. That's sort of the question that I correlate or think of, which of my 7 grandchildren do I love best? Um, I think all the principles are important. I think there seem to be a couple, and I obviously we don't have time to go into all of them, but I do want to highlight one that I think is important for continued growth. And it's in the accelerate cycle. It's called generate high velocity decisions. So here's what Bezos talked about. He said one of the things that slows down a company and their growth is as they grow, they add more layers of bureaucracy, meaning an employee has to get approval to do something, to do an experiment, let's say. And they have to go to a supervisor or a manager or the owner or something like that. And those layers just slow down growth. He said there are only 2 types of decisions that are made in a company. What he called type 1 and type 2, or one-way door and two-way doors. So type 1 decisions, a one-way door, are really big decisions, kind of bet the company decisions, and probably needs as much data and information as you can possibly gather, and probably needs to be made by the top people, founder, leadership team, whatever that looks like in your organization, and needs to be made slowly. He said the problem is that as company grows, they tend to treat all decisions as type 1, which they aren't. He said there are very few decisions that are type 1 decisions. The most common decisions are type 2, what he called two-way doors. Two-way doors mean we make a decision and we move through, go through the door, look on the other side, and we either go, yes, let's continue to move forward, or we go, this is not what I thought it was going to be. So we either pivot or literally turn around and just change the decision. And he said, type 2 decisions are the most common decisions, and they should be made by the lowest level employee that is capable of making the decision, has the knowledge and experience, and with at most 70% of the information you wish you had. The idea here is faster decision making leads to faster growth, faster learning, faster experiments, faster invention. And that's a key to helping a company grow. Recent example, a business I'm familiar with. The founder had a health issue and has been out and unable to do a lot of the work that he was doing for several weeks now. And the business has actually sort of stopped because he was the bottleneck. He made all the decisions. That's an example of a company that's operating in a slow decision-making process. He shouldn't, as the founder of the company, be the only one to make decisions. Because if that person, in this case, he's not there, he's not making decisions, so stuff's not getting done. Customers are getting upset. And so that's, I think, at least for our discussion here, I could point to a whole bunch of other ones, but I think generate high velocity decisions is a key for entrepreneurs to continue to grow.
All right, Steve, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing such valuable insight into risks, innovation, and building businesses that stand the test of time. The work shows that growth is not about avoiding uncertainty, it's about learning how to make smarter decisions understand customers deeply, and create systems that allow business to adapt and thrive. So, Steve, for those who would like to connect with you and learn more about your work, how can they do that?
Well, the book again is The Bezos Letters 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon, and it is available on Amazon. The website for the book, which has some additional information to help you actually incorporate some of the principles into your organization, is thebezosletters.com. And then my primary social platform is LinkedIn. So search Steve Anderson author or Steve Anderson Insurance and let me know you listened, and I'll be happy to connect with you there.
All right, once again, Steve, thank you so much. And thank you to all my listeners for tuning in today. You guys are the reason why we are always here and why we do this. And Steve, do have a wonderful day ahead.